I'm so glad I just gave them the First Amendment. Because if I had told shared with Nancy what I wanted her to share, it would have been that last few minutes. Things you can do to communicate with people like her. She gave us all sorts of other stuff. Maybe not a 3-semester-hour course in 30 minutes, but thank you, Nancy. I haven't flipped the coin, but we'll go this way. John Pudner is from Wisconsin.
Faith and Freedom.
Faith and Freedom. I will put family in there somewhere. Faith and Freedom. And I'll let him introduce what that organization is. I think it's an awesome organization and valuable. And I just read, and of course it slipped the old line, how many 100,000 doors you knocked for Trump. And we appreciate the efforts. So, John, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to break my comments into 3 subtopics here. The first one is, when did the left start their war on the First Amendment? Because I think I saw it happening as it was happening. Wasn't always the case. Secondly, might be the only section where there are a couple things some people disagree with me on, but an old adage we have in campaigns is don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. A few times if someone attacks me, I go, gosh, can I just send you more to Blackwell's old adage? Can you just spend as much time attacking people who are actually voting for Kamala and trying to elect her as opposed to if there's a different means to an end? So that's my second one. Got a little First Amendment within our conversations with each other. And then the third one is just to remind us that we not only need to use the First Amendment to win elections, but to win hearts and minds. Because in some cases, the public is not with us yet and takes work, and we need to win them over, and that's just part of a postulate that any of us have. Sometimes we can win the actual issue in November and then go for it, you know. So those are my 3. So when did the left start their war on the First Amendment? Because I always laugh and think, now when I was back eons ago at Marquette, and we took over the Marquette Tribune, and we started running conservative editorials, none of my professors, I mean, they were mad. They're like, who are these right-wingers who have suddenly taken over the Lib Trib, which is what that paper's been called forever. We're endorsing Robert Bork for Supreme Court. I mean, we literally took over. But there was none of the stuff like you get today where I got a D because I wrote something conservative in a paper. I mean, so there wasn't always a war, and frankly, our concern was back then was that the left was taking the First Amendment too far. I mean, they were talking about pornography and things that had nothing to do with political free speech. So where did this change? Well, I think I saw it change in 2016 at a very specific event. I saw that change happening. I got invited to go to present at what was really a liberal gathering. It's, hey, we want to have a conservative. We're not understanding this whole Trump thing that's getting going, but they weren't scared at all. They didn't think Trump could win. So it's like, we kind of want to have someone who agrees with him. So we're going to put you on some panels. Great. 3 days together, kind of fun. So the first part of that is just a funny, and then it got a little more serious. So the first day, the organizer comes running down the hallway to me, and I guess this is how liberals communicate. They kind of spend 3 days together out there, and you sort of talk, and it was a new experience for me. Comes running to me, John, I have to reach you. I've got to call someone. I've got to talk to you first. What's that? She says, now, did I hear that you actually like Trump and will even vote for him in November? I said, well, of course. I'm going to work for him. Great, thank you. She runs away. I'm like, well, that was a bizarre conversation. So I see her the next day, and again, none of them thought Trump would win yet. So it was kind of amusing to them that they were Trump supporters at the time. So she comes and says, thank you so much. You helped me out. I said, what was that all about? She said, well, there are 125 of us here. And a reporter found out about this convening and said, so is this like all lefties? And she said, and I told them, oh no, we have people there voting for Hillary Clinton and voting for Trump. And it occurred to me, I wasn't sure anyone was here voting for Trump. So I was trying to think of the only one I could think of. So I saved her an interview, I guess, okay. So it was interesting. So the meeting was friendly for a day of judgment. I said, no, I really thought Trump would win. I was almost more like the guinea pig. Like, let's see how this Trump person, let's see what, confuses them. He seems like an okay guy. But it wasn't a threat, because they didn't think he could win. Well, that changed my second 3 things of this convening. There was a Stanford professor presenting, and I was kind of on a panel up in front of everybody, and they were very far left, but I would say he was like what was going to become a never Trumper, I'd say. So but he had a little Republican background, so he says, well, listen, I've crunched the numbers, and no one's going to believe this, but I would calculate there is a 15% chance that Donald Trump can win in November. And the gasp from the room, what? They were mad at him for saying it, just like, what? I thought you were supposed to be a professor who really went by the numbers. Well, I couldn't help just blurting out, look, Trump's going to win this thing. It's not 15%. Oh my gosh. The friendliness ended. And I was actually a true believer. And from that moment on, it was tough. It was kind of vicious. I had another day and a half to live there. Now it's like, no, like we're going to help him win. And then the third thing happened that was really more tragic. God got me a little bit of a friend there. He was very friendly. His name's Derek. I won't say his last name, but he kind of bailed me out of the situation. He kind of said, hey, let me take John's spot and finish the conversation. He was trying, I didn't mind sitting there and arguing with him. But then, getting from the First Amendment to what they want to do with what they're calling the First Amendment, he saw me a little later, one of the most heartbreaking conversations I had. And he said, hey, John, I know you have 9 children. I know, 9 children, 9 grandchildren, all that. He said, that's really great. He said, you like parenting? Yeah, I like a little about parenting. And then he says, well, me and my husband are adopting our first. So I'm like, think of the baby, think of the baby. I started praying for the baby. And I asked the innocent old question that's been asked for all the time. Oh, well, is it a boy or a girl? Not realizing this was the beginning of you can't ask that question. And the moment it still weighs on, I still pray about that baby, not just Derek's baby. He said, well, we're going to take our time in deciding that.
Oh,
you know what I mean? I was just crushed. I mean, it's not even, like, I don't know if at some point, confess, there was some punchline, but I'm just like, okay, all I can do is pray for that baby. He's, one, that they don't do anything. They randomly make the right decision that the gender that God made that baby is the one that's going to leave it. Yeah, just pray for that first. But second, you never know. God works with all things. Maybe there's some testimony. Maybe that baby 20 years from now is talking about what happened. So heavy on my heart. But so beyond the First Amendment, they're trying to turn the First Amendment into something where we can basically confuse your second grader. That's part of our speech. And we can play on a kid who's a little confused, or a kid who jokes about, wanting to play with dolls. Just that's what they're interpreting the First Amendment to be, while they try to gut what the First Amendment has always meant, which is political discussion. So that was a tough one for me. And for me, that weekend was when I really saw that they were going to war in the First Amendment. They felt like you had to be shut up if you didn't accept this new worldview they have, which is partly the trans culture, certainly other things associated with it. And that was just a dividing moment. I thought it was a microcosm. Because I'd done other First Amendment things. I joke, some of you probably heard me say, I had a mild-mannered high school friend from Richmond, Virginia, who hired me to do Breitbart Sports, to start Breitbart Sports. And his name was Steve Bannon. Quiet guy. Steve would zebra punch you because your socks are the wrong color. So, but Steve got me to that, and Steve said something insightful actually a couple years before that. He wants to hire me to start, because I write some sports stuff for fun. I'm a stat guy. And he said, hey, I've read some of your stat emails, and blah, blah, blah. I said, we want to add a Breitbart Sports section. To which I said, Steve, I think Breitbart's one of the great champions of the First Amendment. I mean, what started with Rush Limbaugh saying, I'm not balanced, I am the balance. For me, that was the beginning of the right saying, we're going to create our own media, we're going to reach people, and start to become a threat. But I said, Steve, why do you want a sports section, Breitbart? I didn't get it. It was political policy movement. He said, Pudner, I want you to wake up every morning and go to bed every night, making sure as many Americans as possible know that ESPN is nothing but a liberal tool of Disney that will destroy our culture. And it was almost a mic drop moment. I mean, he hung up with those words. I got it. And it was so good. And we had opportunities, and 80% of what I wrote was just sports game, someone won a tennis match, whatever. But then there were the moments to get those in, on the bathroom bill in North Carolina, when they were saying, we will not have a March Madness basketball game in North Carolina because your governor doesn't want to let men in women's restrooms. A basketball crazy place like North Carolina, that's a big deal. Actually, you saw, they moved the games to South Carolina. You can imagine a basketball crazy place like that, and just seeing this war. But then I thought one of the great moments when I really saw the lash was I'm sitting at a Marquette-Syracuse basketball game, just thinking, I'm going to write a nice friendly story about who scores the winning shot, whatever. It was a lead game in Washington, D.C. and Barack Obama comes on the screen. So this was what I guess it was after the re-elect, so yeah. So people still thought pretty popular. He hadn't started, people hadn't really started to dig into what he'd done. And he goes on the screen, and I noticed about half the people boo and half cheer. And until that moment, that was unusual. Sometimes when a president gets reelected, there's not a whole lot of opposition publicly right away. I just write what I think is a nice, friendly story that says, interesting. Syracuse fans were yelling at each other based on who booed and who didn't. Marquette fans are yelling at each other. It was just interesting to watch each section. I just thought interesting story. So I just write this nice little headline that says, fans split over Obama appearance. Just thought it was a boring headline. Bannon's headline was better. Obama booed at game after day on golf course. So he changed my headline and all hell broke loose. Huffington Post is attacking me. They're saying I'm lying. They're saying no one booed. And it's tricky when you're having these games because the microphone's only in one crowd section and you really couldn't hear it that well on CBS. So Bannon's calling me, cursing at me, saying, do you have recording him booing? I'm like, no, it just happened, you know. And so I'm like, okay, God, I have no way to get out of this. I'm either going to be fired, and then Huffington Post called me to be fired and for lying like this, and this is a blight on Breitbart. And okay, God, this is either going to be a good day or it's going to be a really bad day in which I'm fired and humiliated and never write for anyone again. God, I have no way. This is all in your hands. I have nothing else I can do right now. And so, but however, I was going to the Easter Vigil. It was Easter Saturday. So suddenly my guy, Cole Musio, who actually is Dan's counterpart in Georgia, who's passed great pro-life laws and all, calls me. I say, Cole, look, I'm dead. If we can find anything, I mean, Bannon's mad at me. You know, I feel like everything documented. He says, Pudner, you've never gotten 40,000 Facebook likes before in your life, have you? I said, no, maybe 40. This thing had blown up. But there's still the back and forth. And is he lying? Did they really boo? And thank goodness, proof that God can work through anyone. A bunch of the basketball players waiting to play the next game. I'm sure very liberal. You know, they play March Madness. We have a game on the court, one waiting to play. Start tweeting. Can you believe half of this place is booing the President of the United States? Thank you. So they had all these tweets from liberals complaining about the booing in the state. Thank you, God. I'm praying very hard at church tonight. You bailed me out here. So anyway, so those are the old First Amendment things, but it just hadn't heated up yet. I mean, they were getting nasty about me writing something about it, but I just think once it was Trump might actually win, oh my gosh, he's our president, that's when they just went to war on the First Amendment. So that answers my first question. Now, secondly, I'd say, I don't want anyone to ever misinterpret this as accept the lesser of two evils, but don't make don't make the perfect the enemy of the good is an old adage we were all taught by Morton Blackmore was teaching schools. And what I mean by that is, if you have a disagreement with someone else, who you think is generally conservative, reasonable, whatever, try to determine first, is it a difference in the means to get to the same end, or do they actually have a separate end goal? For example, I want to save every baby we can, okay? So I'm completely against abortion. Now, there are times when tactically, because I'm a number cruncher, I go, you know, I think we can win an election if we do this. And the big one after Dodge was I said, look, we can win with no exceptions because we can't really do anything. But I said, once Roe's overturned, we probably need to give candidates leeway to make like rape and incest exceptions if they're just in a place they can't win the election. So my argument, I'm not asking anyone to agree with this, but I'm just saying, I've got the same goal as someone who says, I'm sorry, I have a good conscience. You know, Chucky Widger is a great representative, a good friend. In my conscience, I cannot back anyone who allows any of those cases. Not asking anyone to change that mind. But if it's a means to the end, if the disagreement is, I think this is how we win, to not have someone in office who is going to wake up and go to bed at night figuring out how to make sure there are no restrictions on abortion through that 9th month. If they're with you in the end, you'll give them leeway in the means. And so that's what I ask people to think through, because I won my big race in 2014. I was gonna I said I will never do another political campaign. I was the only one in the country to ever run a campaign. I recruited a candidate to be a majority leader in the primary. This guy, Eric Tanner, he was majority leader and Speaker of Congress. And I recruited this college professor. We put together this incredible campaign. We had 200 people knocking doors. We had $20,000 along with that. Tanner had $5 million in the bank. And we beat him. So it's just as bad as I said, well, you know anything in politics, you know, if you win, you're a genius for one day. Chris is looking at me nodding. If you lose, you're an idiot for a year. So, you know, I said, I'm quitting. This is like the best win I'll ever have. I'll lose another race next year, they'll know I'm an idiot again. So we do this, I'm done. So I sit out for 8 years, and then Tim Michaels happened to grab me to Ron Johnson and say, hey, someone said you're a political guy, and Rebecca's hired every political person in the state. Would you come on? And my staff's like 23 years old. So anyways, I got back in, but during that, of course, Dodds hit. And it's just to give you an example. Again, when I kind of ran the math and said, look, I've run the numbers. 80% of the state is with us on no exceptions on Escape 49. I just said, as trying to get you to win and beat the guy who's for abortion until birth, I think you have to make a rape and incest exception. Now, yeah, not asking anyone to agree with that. I'm just saying this was kind of, again, the means that I think you win if you do that. I don't think, and so, you know, he didn't want to. So, you know, he was on film not saying it. And I said the same thing to people in Kansas. They were putting through a referendum that year to ban abortion now that we have the ability to do it. And I asked people, I said, guys, if there's any way to do like rape and incest exception, you know, I think you'll pass it. And you know, that referendum got killed. I mean, it was destroyed in a very pro-life state. So I'm just saying that as an example. I'm not saying that to adjust myself or anything else. I'm just saying there have been cases like that where I think this is what we can win. And again, the perfect end would be good. And that doesn't mean in a given district you can't take a stronger position or anything else. And this came up again. We did back one bill that some pro-life groups did on, let's lower the abortion age once the judge had thrown out 1849. And you know, groups disagree, that's fine. Again, it's means to an end. But in my math, a bunch of those primaries, like 16 primaries, came down to a candidate who took one of those two positions, lower the age, who don't do it because we're going to fight for 1849. And I do think the fact that almost all the ones who took the position lowering it won, I do think it saved the legislature. I just don't think we could have won with the candidates who, you know, with several of the others. So it kept the majority. And not perfectly enemy good, pretty complaints about, you know, the Republican majority, I'm sure. But so all I'm saying is not saying, hey, you should take that the way I think through campaigns, but just say if you have a candidate who feels like they're taking the position again, see if their heart is with you first. You know, that's what you need to know. Now, the counter argument is a very good one, which has been, hey, if you make that exception, anyone can use it all the way until birth. You need people to think these through. When we were at Bob McDowell, who was the first guy, was the governor of Virginia, a good friend, who they tried to throw in prison with the same prosecutor as Trump. We structured this with Bob, and to get the minutia, we structured the bill so that like a rape had to have been reported within 2 days, things like that. So, you know, again, not trying to get through the minutia of legislation, just to say there are ways to do that if your candidate's heart is with you, that they're drafting a bill that does almost all that you want, versus if their heart isn't with you, you know, that's a different matter. So anyway, that's just my, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. You need to be able to, you know, and maybe it's not tough, maybe you're gonna fight out in the primary, but then in the general, you know, there are very clear differences. And, you know, we can't, as a C3, say we want one party over the other. We can only say we want conservatives over liberals, but, you know, there's gonna be a conservative candidate and a liberal candidate once you get to the general. So please just keep that in mind. Okay, third and lastly is, as we protect the First Amendment, think through how to use it, and then again, you're sometimes changing hearts and minds, sometimes you can actually change legislation. Just be an example, I want to keep trying to change hearts and minds to go more pro-life than I'm talking, I think is possible in some races. I had a professor at Marquette who very conservative, went to the University of Dallas after, and he made a point I really thought. He was talking about First Amendment. He said, look, there are restrictions. The old one is you can't cry fire in a crowded theater because people trample each other. Okay, that's one example. There's always been this understanding that if you're doing something to hurt someone, God forbid, riling up a group that thinks it's okay to shoot someone while they're giving a speech like Charlie, you know, then of course there are exceptions on free speech. But he said another thing, as you can see, he said, you know, what I found is I'm a very good debater in many settings, but if there's an issue that seems so obvious to me, I'm not a great debater. I think a lot of us say, if there's something that's so obvious, and you have someone on the other side, it's like, how can you not look at the picture of the baby and understand? How can you not look at the 6'6" swimmer jumping into the pool against Riley Gates and not understand? And at first it's just mind-boggling. Like, I can't argue with you because your idea is so bizarre. And I just say, try to get over that and try to meet them where they are. And if it's something, I don't know, I keep using abortion, it's just a tough issue. If someone's, look, are you for any any restrictions. Well, yeah, I remember the baby was kicking, and I guess it was 6 months. So yeah, I guess you shouldn't have abortion. Okay, now you're in a discussion. Now you say, oh yeah, that baby actually feels pain much earlier than you would feel the kick. And then at least you're in the dialogue. And so that's the hearts and minds. This doesn't win an election in 3 months, but it starts to change that culture and have them think and just how far they've gone on the other side of it. And we've had to do this on other issues. For example, believe it or not, obviously stopping trans in sports is, right now, it's a home run for us. We've won people. It was not the case when it first came out. Trans in bathroom, trans sports, it was first polling that over 40% agreed with both those things. Let men play in women's sports and let men walk into women's bathrooms. And it took some arguing, it took some examples. The left at first, they kind of video of kind of a feminine guy. He just seemed like he was a little, soft-spoken, and they kind of painted a little sympathetic character. And thank goodness, Leah Thomas, as he goes by now, took the stage and stood up next to Riley Gaines, said, oh, wait a second, but it took a little time. And my best friend in Virginia was Chris Lasavita, who ended up being Trump's campaign manager this year. He was one who wanted me to move back to Wisconsin from Alabama. He said, John, I think we're okay in Alabama. Wisconsin's pretty tight. And I always wanted to move back. By the way, my wife's from here. She wanted to marry Southern, move South. I want her to move back. 34-year argument. I finally win. I'm like, hey, sorry, Lasavita needs me in Wisconsin. We're moving back. So we're here for life. But anyway, but Lasavita cut that commercial, the They Them commercial, which I think just really sealed the election. Just to say, this stuff is absurd. If you remember that on the first commercial, just the guy who'd already, I think he murdered, and then he's getting a taxpayer-funded sex change abortion in prison, and Kamala's bragging about it. It was just that moment. So we need to win these arguments, but look for evidence, try to get over the how in the world can you think this is okay to how do I convince this person it's not okay. So I ask you to think on that. And that whole, them, they, that was what I thought flipped it. And Spencer knows what's coming next. I can't resist. So yeah, my daughter, when she's 12, beat Riley Gaines in a swimming. I'm just going to say it. So nothing to do with the speech. I'm just throwing it every time. So
Never does.
But high moment. God could have taken anything, I guess. I had some sins to work out. So I wouldn't be happy then. So the last thing I just want to touch on real quick as part of that is the FEC decision is so important. The FEC decision we talked about a few months ago says pastors can now endorse within the church. Now, some people say, well, wait, that's federal, that's not state. Well, no, what the church had to be concerned about before is Biden taking away their tax exempt status. So then from then on, people in the pews could not give and write off their taxes, which some people don't deduct, some do, but if you did. So that's where they kind of lived in fear. That is such a monumental breakthrough. And I can tell you, and turn things over to Dan. Dan has like 1,000 more churches than I. He really is. But we've got a few hundred, and I can tell you the first conversation was always, what if the IRS comes after me? What if I... And this it gets you through that conversation with the pastor. Hey, first of all, here's the FEC decision. You can no longer use your tax exempt status for actually endorsing for the pulpit. Now they were using that to say, I can't even let your literature in the back, I can't let you hand out. It gets you over the hurdle. That helps two things. One thing, I don't want to ever question a pastor, but there may be a few who are more using that as an excuse because they're worried about losing a couple donations. So it takes away the excuse if that's the case. That's 1%. 99% of pastors who turn it, we're really just nervous. And you want to give protection. You don't want them to suddenly, oh my gosh, we're going to go bankrupt as a church. So just understand that's what they're worried about. Doesn't mean some state can't put a law in trying to sick a pastor, But what it says is the IRS can no longer go and say you are no longer a nonprofit organization as a church, which I think was a dubious claim anyway. But they can't even make that argument now. You're still a church. You can still be a 501c3. You're still fine. So clear. So please use that. If you have a pastor who's a little hesitant on passing out, like we did voter comparisons, we don't actually say to vote for, but I say I hold it up. And I said this leading up to Trump's surrogate tour. I hold it up and I say, look, all we're doing is listing Kamala's 8 positions and Trump's 8 positions. I'll go on a Democratic tour if they want. And I want anyone out there who believes in 37 genders to know you have a candidate, and it's on this side. We don't say vote for, so we give the pastor a little leeway, because turning out churches is the big thing. So with that, in turning over to Dan, I just want to say I mentioned a former employee of mine who's fantastic. I would say my best employee ever, but Spencer Laverty's in the room, so it's a close call. But he started Dan's counterpart in Georgia, and when he started bragging about Dan, this young ambassador network he was the church ambassador network first, which I think is the best grounding. And for those of you, I'm sure most of you have followed the Family Council, Wisconsin Family Council. I mean, where would we be without them? I mean, they've been in this war forever. They've got lots more churches than you do, than we do. We're getting started. I think what we've talked we have a little more reach maybe into some Lutheran and Catholic that, we just have a little different angle. We think we can complement them a little. But in handing this over to Dan Degner, I just want to say, this is like whatever band it was in New York that said, and now the Beatles is coming up. That's how you should view the transition. So thank you.